Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Wildcard Sunday where we look at things a little bit off the beaten path, a little bit different from our regularly scheduled videos and artists during the week. So today we are looking at what is basically my favorite issue of Wizard ever, Wizard number 16. Now, a lot of that has to do with nostalgia, my sweet memories from the past of being a kid and discovering Wizard a little bit earlier on, but specifically this issue was kind of an explosion of discovering new artists and making connections and starting to really understand how comic books worked, at least, continuity wise and with artists and inkers, and, kind of understanding the mechanics of it all. Again, at this point, the image revolution has happened, right? So this is kind of the second wave. And what makes it really interesting is this is the first time I come across Sam Kieth where I think I'm conscious of it and of his style and how different his art looks. Let me just open this beauty up for you because that is the poster also that's included inside that, even though this is a vintage proper copy that I found, I did pull out that poster and put it up. I had it on my wall as a kid with my original copy, and as soon as I got this, too much nostalgia, I whipped out that poster and it's up on my wall here above my drawing table. It's one of my favorite images ever, to be honest. It's a really cool jam piece between, again, the second wave of Image. Now, the second wave of Image also includes the first wave guys, Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, doing kind of their first secondary, I guess, or creations at Image. So Jim Lee's kind of doing a Sin City kind of riff with Deathblow. And Rob Liefeld, I would not have figured it out from this image here, right, when this originally came out. But eventually when Darker Image came out, you kind of realized that Blood Wolf was basically kind of a ripoff of Lobo, right? And even now saying it, I just realized Lobo means wolf, right, in Spanish. So Blood Wolf is almost like, Lobo, Blood Lobo. It's pretty darn close. So I hadn't figured it out just with this image here because it's not that obvious, but it would become obvious when you read Darker Image number 1. I have a review of that from way back when I started the channel. You can go check that out. Of course, it's in the archives. But what was really exciting about this image, I wasn't really into Deathblow really quick that much. And when Darker Image number 1 would come out, that would play out where Deathblow was the least interesting of the characters in the series and the story, whatever. At least, as a Lobo ripoff, it was still kind of entertaining, I guess. Blood Wolf, yeah, that's the name. But what was really exciting about this cover was the inclusion of Pitt and the Max, right? So Pitt being introduced, I knew about Pitt. I'd seen a few advertisements in the Image comics, but this is like our first kind of real cool, clear shot of him. I really like this shot because it's inked by Dale Keown here, and it's kind of proto design for what his final design will look like, because I don't know if his vest is actually studded in the comic. It might be, but it's also plaid and like a lumberjack's kind of vest, and he's added chains all over the place. He's kind of wrapped in chains and stuff, and here he's not. Here he's got more of kind of a biker vibe, which is fine. Like, I have no problem with that. And again, Keown inking himself, which is always great. And then there was this guy here where I was like, man, the inking and really makes him stand out from the other guys, even though I think the Image integrates the different styles very well. And there's just something so captivating about how odd he looked, right? The fact that he was giving you the finger, like, was he? What? Like, I'm not sure. Is that something that comes out of his knuckle and he's got fingers, or is that his middle finger? And it still had, that Marvel Comics Presents aesthetic of Wolverine, right, with the ripped costume and the strands, the telephone wire strands that were kind of come out everywhere. Like, there was just something about it that was just so cool. And I got to admit, as a young kid, this is 1992, so I'm 11 years old, and my name is Max, and a character comes out that's called The Max, and is actually, at least at this point, looks really cool, and is probably not lame. You've seen me review the series, so you kind of know my thoughts on that. Not saying it's lame, but it's definitely not what I expected. But what I expected at this point in the visual of the character, I was sold right away. I just thought he looked really cool and really different. Like, Sam Kieth is good. He really, I think, created a design that's very different. No one looks like the Max, right? And there's kind of they're more kind of monstery kind of characters, all three of these guys. So maybe that's why I like them more, I guess. But yeah, there's just something so evocative. And this issue, again, will push me to look further into Sam Kieth and his comics and stuff. And obviously get very excited for Darker Image and the Max. So yeah, just a lot of memories with this cover, and I do want to mention, as long as we're looking at Wizard covers, something that's not mentioned that kept kind of a consistent look through all the different artists who did the cover is the colorist, right? So the guy's name is McNabb. Where is it? Mark McNabb. Just a shout out to him because you can see it on the cover here. Back then, I don't think this is quite computer coloring yet, although I might be wrong, but I don't think so. There seems to be a bit of airbrushing involved in the highlights and stuff, but I do think it looks really cool. I would have liked to have seen a comic colored this way. I think he did a great job on the Wizard covers, honestly. And again, he's what kind of kept those covers consistent aesthetically to a certain extent, as there were so many varying artists contributing pieces to Wizard covers, right? And that brings me to something that's kind of cool that I'd forgotten about. Hopefully I can get that all in the frame there. Let me see what I can do. Yeah, there we go. So what we have on the interior here is pretty interesting, right? So you've got all the Wizard covers and Wizard issues up to this point. So we're at issue 16, right? So 1 to 15. Don't miss an issue. There's an empty space here. The guide to Wizard, the guide to comics, Wizard, and then there's just an empty space here, right? And then if you follow the numbering, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, empty space, 11, 10, 11, 12, sorry. I don't know how to count. 13, 14, 15, and this issue 16, right? So what the heck is going on here, and why can't we see issue 10? So I remember thinking, you know, something weird obviously there, but no internet back then, can't really ask anyone, so no one really had, I didn't have any idea of what was going on there. Until later on, I did find out, and eventually was able to get my hands on a copy of that issue, Wizard number 10. And if you know anything a little bit about litigation and copyrights and stuff like that, well, and a little bit of comic book history, you probably know what this is about, but if not, I'll tell you. This is in and around the time of Image Comics coming out, and Rob Liefeld promoting Youngblood, his first kind of creator-owned comic that was going to be the first Image comic, really officially. And at that time, he was still on X-Force, so he kind of decided to combine both of those, you know, his new character, his main character, Shaft, I guess, for the team of Youngblood, and the main character from X-Force, Cable, and put them on the same cover, right? And this created a huge stir with Marvel Comics. They were not happy about it, and that's why we only ever get this image on the cover here. It's not to be ever reprinted, I guess, or some sort of deal there, and that's why we didn't get it on the inside cover of this guy here. So take a good long, hard look at it. You can look at it on the internet, obviously. Pretty cool. It's peak Liefeld for me, right? I've talked often where I feel the period between where he's kind of working at the later issues of X-Force and early issues of Youngblood. There's some crossover there. Is really peak Liefeld to me. Still inking himself. Very dynamic. Lots of volume in the artwork, no matter what you think of his interpretation of the anatomy. There's still good volume on it. That McNabb guy, once again, I think colors this really well. It looks cool. And an interesting fact, I think they don't usually do this on the covers, at least if I look at this one. Oh yeah, okay, so maybe they started doing it with that's a really funny detail. I just got to say here on video, I had never I noticed it now because we're talking about copyrights and stuff, so I'm like, oh, they must have added, you know, Cable 1992 Marvel Entertainment and Shaft 1992 Rob Liefeld, because Marvel insisted on that, right? But then I look at issue 16 and it's there as well. So were they doing it from the beginning, or since the problems they had with this issue, they just decided to do it to protect themselves, right? I'd have to look at issues like 12, 13, 14. I do have some of those. If you have answers on that, let me know. I'm not going to go rifle through my Wizards right now during the review to check that out. But maybe there's one last way to maybe check it out. I don't know if these reproductions here, if they're big enough to show that kind of information. Oh yeah, okay, so I can tell that there's a kind of a copyright line here as well, and these are prior issues. There's one on the side here, so okay, I guess that was just standard procedure from the very beginning. But Marvel did insist on that issue 10 that the poster not be the poster in the middle of the issue not be Shaft and Cable, so they handed them a Spider-Man poster, which is I have in the issue, and it's just kind of lackluster. It's a Mark Bagley drawing. It's not bad, but it's just, you know, not quite as cool as a Shaft Cable cover by Rob Liefeld, right? The Darker Image. Yeah, I always remember Darker Image to me. It's like I kind of put words to it. I was thinking about it, going through this issue real quick, rifling through it before the review, and it's like, it was almost as if it felt like it was Image doing their version of Heavy Metal magazine, you know, and that's kind of the vibe I wanted. I got a little of that from Blood Wolf, even though it was a Lobo ripoff. Didn't get it at all from Deathblow. It was kind of just CIA murky guy stuff. Definitely in Darker Image got it from the Max. And then that kind of trailed off in his regular series, and we got less and less of that. So yeah, I guess that's how I describe how I felt about Darker Image at the time. It was almost like a cool Image version of Heavy Metal. Not that Heavy Metal wasn't cool, but again, the Image version. So going through this issue, what I realized is I was pretty selective in what I would read, right? Stuff like this wasn't really important to me. I don't remember reading it. And so, yeah, there was a lot of stuff I would skip over and just not be interested in. So I'll only read the stuff I wanted to, and I was, again, interested in. I'm repeating myself. So yeah, I realized how much of this issue I just kind of skipped through, but as we go through it, I'll point that out. So here's where I was introduced to, on the cover, the Max, and then Sam Keith is the artist. And I like having seen that, I was like, I remember having seen Marvel Comics Presents covers and associating it and realizing it's the same artist, right? And I always thought his art, I remember thinking his art looked weird and stuff, and it is very different from the other guys, but it's very evocative, and I loved it. And just seeing this page here from Darker Image #1, I was like, wow, I was just in awe of this stuff. How different, again, how different the Max looked, and the aesthetic and the inking and stuff is really sold it. So I would read all of these, some of the news comics and stuff that were coming out, Marvel Aid, Street Fighter 2, the movie, kind of just vestiges of the 90s is what's going on here. I remember this artwork by Bill Sienkiewicz, excuse me. Looked very odd to me back then. I've learned to appreciate it now. This was always interesting, an anthology with a kick jab, the bullet hole issue. So they claim to have actually shot like a bullet through the middle of the issue for some reason. It's an odd kind of gimmick for a comic. I remember just being so involved in reading details of stuff I never saw. Like, I'm still looking at this. I'd like to see that. Let me read it. So from Parts Unknown, the first non-movie related comic book to be sold in video stores has apparently sold out, and reorders are now being taken. The number of copies being reordered is larger than the original orders. Excuse me. And sales are expected to increase. The book involves two alcoholic detectives who are trying to stop an alien invasion. So not one alcoholic, but two alcoholic detectives. The aliens are here to mate with Earth women. Its target audience is those that enjoyed the likes of Terminator, Predator, Aliens, etc. The first issue shipped in July. The second is due out in September. Cover price $250. Eclipse Comics. So if anyone out there knows about this, please tell me, because maybe I should look this up and see if there's any way to find this and hopefully at a decent price, get a copy of it. I'd be interested in checking it out. Does it actually... Well, it says they've sold a bunch of copies, so they got to be out there. I remember reading something like that and taking a little detail, and the aliens are here to mate with Earth women. I remember creating a whole mythology and using that aspect with a character, my derivative creations when I was this age. I would read about stuff and look at, the comics I was reading and create characters that were pretty darn derivative of what I was reading. And it's so funny of me, me doing a derivative Rob Liefeld character when Rob Liefeld's doing a derivative version of something else, for example, right? At some point, I still have some of those old drawings, so I'll be pulling those out and doing a review at some point on that stuff. It's very funny to see my Image-like characters or my Predator-like character. And when I do the review, I'll definitely point all those out. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's funny. So all stuff I wasn't really into necessarily, but the news section would kind of clue me in that there was wow, there's a pretty big world of comics out there just outside of Marvel, DC, and Image, right? So I will say Wizard would help with that for sure and open up my comics culture. At least originally in these early issues, they definitely were paying more time and attention to more independent stuff, and later on that would kind of start to narrow more towards the mainstream, just Marvel, DC, Image, movies and stuff. But at this point, they were still pretty open to a lot of different publishers and independent comic creators. Of course, this was still the comics boom, so there there was just so much product, and it was so profitable, I guess, to certain people. For Wizard, they certainly profited from that initial 90s comic book bubble. This was something else that clued me in. I talked about it earlier in the review. If you can't wait for Darker Image to get your dose of Sam Keith style action, check out Marvel Comics Presents 117 to 122 for the wicked Venom versus Wolverine versus Nightmare Brawl. No matter what Keith does, his art always brings you to the max. Okay, very cheesy text there, but yeah, just seeing this even at this size was just more than enough to get me to go back and get those issues. A few of them had already come out. I bought them and then continued on to 122. I think some of these last few issues actually came out in around the same time as Darker Image. Like Sam Keith at least was pretty good on deadlines. But man, this series just like peak Sam Keith stuff, and the artwork is great. Like you definitely should check it out. I have a review on it. It's a little early on in the channel, so maybe not that great, but whatever. The series itself, awesome. Stellar artwork. Definitely worth checking out for anyone out there. And I think you can still find those issues pretty cheap in dollar bin boxes here and there. Shadow Man changes costume. I don't know if that's important. Let's move on. So yeah, this was the kind of stuff I didn't really look at. I may have read, not at first glance. I would go through and read the stuff I really want to, and then, to kind of milk it and get the most out of the issues I could, I'd go back and read something like this. I know they're talking about different covers and stuff, and anyways. Palmer's Picks, Hepcats, just from the visuals, I was not into the stuff at that time, to be honest. And I wasn't that open to Palmer's Picks. Every once in a while, it would have, if the comic he was focusing on and the images looked interesting, I would read it. But something like Hepcats like this, I would definitely skip over, especially when I was 12 or 13, or at this point, I'm sorry, probably 11. Writing at the Edge, this is probably something I ended up reading months later because I was hungry for any text that I hadn't read yet. At this point, I'm not into video games that much. I'm really into drawing and comics, really. Video games kind of dropped off a little bit. So it wasn't the type of stuff that I'd be reading. Anything really into video games. More video game stuff, which makes sense at that time. The Brat Pack, I think I read this. Welcome aboard another edition of the Brat Pack, where every month Wizard speaks to a group of young comic collectors to see what the fans have to say. Yeah, I mean, is anything really memorable in there? Not really. Probably the same thoughts that I had at the time, right? Brutes and Babes was always something I liked, of course, because of my interest in drawing. So Bart Sears, not that I agree now with 100% of everything that he says, but I mean, a lot of the good kind of solid basics of what you should know about anatomy, perspective, drawing the human figure and then applying that to comic books is pretty sound, most of the stuff. And I mean, as an artist, I always kind of respected Bart Sears. He had, I don't know how to describe it. His characters always look kind of lumpy, but that's because he's paying so much attention. Like he really knows all the muscles and how they move and how they shift. His characters always are correct, and anatomically, although lumpy, the muscles are all in the right place and twist. Even with Spider-Man, who he twists around and stuff, like all these calf muscles and tendons and stuff are all in the right place. Really pays very close attention to muscular anatomy, and he's very good at it for sure. So obviously that works well for comic books, right? And not just with the males, but the ladies as well. Surprised that, this was just 3 pages here early on in the Wizard run. So 3 pages, I think eventually graduates to 5 or 6. And later on with other artists like Greg Capullo and Walter Simonson, they get a few more pages, I think. Hollywood Heroes, I don't know if I was reading this that much. I wasn't into Quantum Leap. So, a lot of times the articles, the image would kind of clue me in as to whether I wanted to read it or not. And back then, anything relating to comic books on TV or in movies or any, outside of comic books themselves were usually pretty cheesy and just not very interesting. So I don't think much of anything in these articles is anything to write home about. Magnus Robot Fighter, just wearing a skirt, I don't think is ever very much a manly look. Right, so just never liked that character, really. Here's something, though. I may have read this section or at some point read this article or parts of it, because I do remember finding out about this show. The new CBS comic-based sitcom Bob is headed your way as a comic courtesy of Marvel. So I knew about the, did I know about the TV show? Or maybe I learned about it here, or I'd seen it on TV. Anyways, I was watching Bob because it had, even though it was a sitcom, it had minimal involvement in comic books other than it was taking place with a comic book artist who was working for a publisher. That was the context of the series with Bob. It wasn't very popular for, I guess comic books weren't very popular at that time, just to the mass kind of mainstream audience. But it was kind of it only lasted one season. But there's a moment there, and I remember seeing this episode, and I was not yet fully aware, but like basically this episode was presenting Jack Kirby. They were at some comic book awards show in the episode, and you get Jack Kirby, you get Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee. I think maybe someone else from the Image crew, but basically, yeah, you got a few of the Image guys in the TV show on Bob. And again, not a lot of people know about that. You can probably look that up on YouTube. I'm sure the video's there. You would write like, I don't know, Bob Comic Book Awards or something. But yeah, definitely a quick little cameo there by Jack Kirby. So I remember reading this, coming back to it later, after I discovered that this was Kelly Jones, the guy who was doing the covers of the Batman comics. Because originally going through it, looking at these images here, which are from Sandman, obviously, I didn't find, I've never had a huge interest in that goth kind of Sandman thing, so this didn't interest me much. But I do think I remember coming back and reading this article, because I then knew who Kelly Jones was and figured it out, kind of, even though I wasn't into Sandman himself, I was into Kelly Jones and his art. And then reading this article, there was here a brand new one talking about a new comic, a sequel to Red Rain, and a brand new one called Dark Joker. So Dark Joker it's an Elseworlds comic. It's not talked about a lot. No one really seems to remember it. I was really into it and I bought it, and I think it's pretty fun and cool. So it's a Batman medieval Elseworld, so the Joker's kind of taken over and Batman's in hiding. He's kind of a hybrid, he's almost like Man-Bat, I guess, kind of in this world. But yeah, just a fun comic that's not very well known, should be checked out. I should actually do a review of that one soon. Maybe I'll throw that in for the next Wildcard Sunday. That'd be a good one. An article again on Sandman. There's no way you're going to get me to read that. At this point, I'm not reading X-Men. I'm fully into Image stuff, so this has no interest for me, really. I didn't even know there was an X-Trader. The only thing about this artwork here that always bothered me is I knew this was John Romita Jr., but there's something about this that seemed unfamiliar to me as John Romita Jr., so I always wondered who this artist was here for the longest time. Eventually figuring out that, yes, actually it is also John Romita Jr. Peter David talking about writing comics, just not my thing either. Not at that point. I wanted to draw comics. I wasn't thinking of writing them yet. Even though I was making my own, and I guess just didn't consider it writing for some weird reason. Yeah. So, of course, this was of huge interest to me, right? Here, Pitt, the interview with Dale Keown. So he talks about his past on Aircel Comics and, doing the... his approach to the Incredible Hulk series. So you get examples of that here with Dragon Force. I guess he did Dragon Force and Dragon Ring. Anyways, that early Aircel stuff is confusing in that sense, but actually pretty good artwork. I reviewed a few issues of that as well, so you can go back and check those out. Dale Keown was already kind of fully formed as an artist, doing really well. And again, this is maybe the reason why this cover to me is kind of iconic. Last issue he did for Marvel and the Incredible Hulk. Yeah, and some interesting stuff here he talks about. In fact, I've already written a Pit theme song. I'd like to release it with one of the issues, not a flexi disc, but include an ad and have them send away for the CD. But that never really came to fruition. Dale Keown, had he had it a little bit more together on the business side of things, I think could have done a lot better. I think I talked about it last Pit review. But it's, kind of sad. Very talented, but could have been much bigger if that's what he was looking for, I guess. Seems like he wasn't. So these are the wizard covers that people would draw and send in as fan art. Some pretty cool stuff here. This is pretty good here. And he is the winner, right? I guess. Yeah, that's a pretty cool cover. like this Terminator. Everything else is like, all right. I do remember this. This is pretty short. Later on, this would become at least 4 pages, a 4-page segment. Early cosplay and Wizard, like, oh my god, these people today are making way more effort with their cosplay costumes than people were back then. This Gambit here, I'm not quite sure about. Robin looks all right. I would say the Spider-Man maybe is kind of cool. It's kind of like the Alex Ross kind of Spider-Man, I would say, where the costume's a bit loose and stuff. I like that. That, though, that's just a bad choice. Why not cut out some eye holes? That's just horrible. Looks like Wolverine's on acid. So, issues to look out for. Magnus Robot Fighter number 5. I don't think today is anything special. Megaton, though, number 3. Very hard to find. And they were probably right in pointing to this one being eventually something that is sought out by collectors. I would read the Wizard's Crystal Ball. It would tell you about basically new comics that were coming out and what's, possibly could be popular or what people are going to be into. So honorable, just because it talks about Pitt, and I like Pitt. Honorable mention department. A few more things this month are worth a mention. Dale Keown's Pitt number 1 from Image probably won't skyrocket overnight, but consider the facts. It's a regular series. Keown had writing experience early in his career. Oh, that's interesting to know because I do think Pitt, writing-wise, is a bit more solid than most of the Image series. At least as solid as Spawn, we'll say, and, maybe a little bit under Savage Dragon, but still in the top tier kind of storylines at Image, early Image anyways. While Keown's no Jim Lee in the fan popularity department, he hasn't had a lot of exposure to the audiences that read Image books, and his art is certainly, amazing, and it'd be surprising that people wouldn't be into it. Anyways, if you're into Jim Lee, you're probably into Dale Keown, I would think. To me, Dale Keown is better than Jim Lee. Dale certainly got the talent, and if he sticks with this title for a while, his popularity in Pitt's number 1's value will continue to grow. I don't know if that happened. He did stick with it, though. We got like 20 issues of Pitt, which is pretty solid for an Image guy, and it's a beginning, middle, and end, clearly. As to the value of issue number 1 of Pitt, it's going to continue to grow. I don't know about that because there are a lot of copies out there. You can find Pitt number 1 for pretty darn cheap out there, probably in some dollar bins. Still a cool issue to have, though. Yeah, so this is definitely a moment in time for me. So, the Max, Pitt, darker Image, all that stuff I've talked about with the cover. This is when Superman, the Death of Superman, when that came out, I remember waiting in line to get that comic in my comic shop. Did the typical thing back then. My parents, the retailer had limited it to 1 copy per customer because he hadn't ordered a lot, or as much as maybe he wish he had. So my mom stood in line, my dad stood in line, and we basically walked out of there with 3 copies, which are probably worthless today, worth less than, the price we paid back then and the paper it's printed on. Who made money on that issue? DC Comics. Strife's, first of all, Stike File, that's a funny typo, but Strife's Strike File number 1, I guess they didn't even have any of the actual material within it ready for this promo because this is just Jim Lee's shot of Strife in the X-Men trading card set, which is really cool if you check out because it's not Jim Lee being inked by Scott Williams, it's Jim Lee inking himself. And I mentioned before, I think in the last Pit review as well, in passing, but I do think Jim Lee inking himself has more volume in his art and his characters and his anatomy and stuff. Anytime Scott Williams inks him or inks in Dale Keown on those Pit covers that I've talked about, I feel like he flattens the art and makes things flatter than and not kind of kills a bit of the volume, basically. And when I say volume, obviously I don't mean sound, right? I mean the roundness of objects and the volume of it and the space it takes, I hope I'm describing that properly. Anyways, some cool stuff I discovered here. Batman Elseworlds I was really into for a while, so I got a lot of them. The Blue, the Gray, and the Bat is pretty cool, where Batman's kind of like an old cowboy on a horse. It's pretty cool. Great art. So I remember kind of some of these were suggestions. These are things I would seek out and maybe check out 1 or 2 issues of just to see if I was into it, right? Wizard was kind of a tastemaker back then, for sure. It's funny, a lot of these images, though simple, whatever, just kind of burned into my memory here. Robin 3000, which is a beautiful book. Another that I should look at and review eventually. I don't have copies of it, but I'm sure it's easy to find out there. Not something that's worth much or that people are talking about. The Wizard of Cards, I was not really into the cards other than the actual Marvel Universe cards and X-Men stuff. So I would look at these to see like, oh my God, my card's worth $1.25. Don't know where they were getting these prices either. Don't know how accurate this stuff was. Feel like it was probably just made up, right? Characters that are more popular, I guess, are worth more, and their cards are worth more. Yeah, the DC ones too. And usually what this would indicate when you would hit the card early on these Wizard issues, when you hit the card price section, it means you were nearing the end of the issue. So toying around back then for McFarlane Figures toys are just not much to talk home. What's that expression? Anyways, not much to talk about is how I'll put it, because the expression eludes me right now. And toys were still kind of shitty, to be honest, and McFarlane came in, kicked ass, and everyone had to kind of step up their game. So we're really at the point here where people are not having to step up their game yet. But this section was always fun, where people take existing characters, make them into new ones. So we've, and like just people, just to show you in the early 90s, the kind of blurry, shitty pictures, Polaroids, I guess people are sending in. Today with phones and stuff, man, we get such better looking pictures from just your average Joe. But back then, not everyone was had photography skills, I guess is how I'd put it. You don't believe that? Then believe he's the creation of Rob Herbert of Wilmington. Judge Dredd was originally a Toy Biz Batman. Wow, that's quite a stretch. Was originally a Storm figure for Psylocke. That makes sense. Is from David and was made from a Secret Wars Doctor Doom head and Secret Wars Magneto body. I don't know about the head because it does end up looking still too much like Doctor Doom, but it's a pretty good looking Spectre. Savage Dragon was formerly a superpowered Shazam. Okay, the smile, I guess. And was made from a battle-damaged Terminator. Oh, that does make sense. That's why the eyes are a bit squared off, I guess. More robotic. So yeah, fans making toys. That was pretty fun. Always a fun section in Wizard. And yeah, so we're nearing the end of the issue. This month's #1, so every #1 issue coming out that month. Not everyone. I'm sure there were more independent comics that aren't listed here. Top selling comics, not anything I really paid much attention to. So these are the top 10 kind of back issues. So, you know, I'd be interested in some of these if it was... I can't think of one here that really... I remember kind of pining to get this one. And Shadowhawk, funny enough, is here, and you can find that in dollar bins. So I did buy that when that came out, though. All right, Wizard's top 10 hottest artists. So this is... Yeah, this pretty much describes most of the artists I was into at that time, for sure. Todd McFarlane, yup. Jim Lee, yup. Rob Liefeld, yup. Mark Silvestri, yup. Dale Keown, for sure. Whilce Portacio. I was never a huge Whilce Portacio guy. He's the one guy I never really got into for some reason. It's not like his art is bad or anything. And in connection with Jim Lee, you know, I just never really got into him. Sam Keith, I thought was awesome as well. So, you know, we talked about that. This review. Mark Bagley on Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, he's all right. He's, you know, not on the same level as the other guys. I appreciate his art, but I never really followed him specifically as an artist. And neither Ron Lim nor John Byrne. Not really my kind of cup of tea. So this section was always fun to see pictures of professionals back in the day because it was really rare to see. So probably my first look at Bob Kane ever. Francis Ford Coppola. Don't even know if I knew who that was back then. Now I do. Not all of his movies are great, but I mean, check out Apocalypse Now. Check out Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Godfather 1 and 2, obviously. Number 3, maybe not so much. Dennis O'Neil, who wrote Batman for the longest time. Murat Michaels, who worked at Extreme Studios for Rob Liefeld. And Eric Larson, Savage Dragon. Will Eisner, who, you know, I would get to know more, of course, across through the years, and his spirit. Michael Allred, who does Madman, and Mark Grunwald, who maybe hasn't already passed away, but, you know, apparently was very well liked. Only positive comments from him and about him from comic book professionals after his passing. A lot of these in the Wizard Price Guide, these small images here, that's all I had back then to, you know, have more content, more images, more material, no internet, right? So just something this size here, you know, here's a cover, you'd find stuff out. I'm like, oh my God, that's Art T-Bear. I recognize his signature. Oh, he did a Superman cover? Really? Like some West Coast style kind of guy? It's almost like Jim Lee doing Superman, right? Back in the day. And all of these little images are almost kind of, again, burnt into my memory, or iconic somehow, right? Like, I never read this comic, but I know this image. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily the case with all of them here. This one for sure. Not so much with Atlantis. But there was always a few that would kind of jump out at you, right? Michael Golden doing a Batman cover, right? Why does that jump out at me? Because it's Michael Golden. He's an awesome artist. See, not so much here because it's kind of just generic artwork. But then you get John Romita Jr. doing Cable #1. That jumps out at you. Wear cap. That's a funny moment in time. And this is one, and for some reason, in a weird kind of connection here, there's a picture of Dale Keown. What was that? This character almost looked like Dale Keown somehow. This cover here, Matt Wagner doing Batman. I know it's small on the screen there. I apologize, but that's just, it's a great image. There's another great dear Lord, Matt Wagner Batman cover. And I mean, that was, you know, other than that, I didn't spend much time on the price guide. I'd check every once in a while some of the comics I own, see if they were worth anything. You know what I mean? Mark Teixeira, Ghost Rider, good stuff. So we'll just speed it up a little bit. Some more Dale Keown Hulk. And sometimes you would discover in this price guide, you'd be like, oh, there's like, I'll point it out here, there's a Joker series. There was a Joker series in the 70s, apparently. Lasted 9 issues only. Wasn't very popular. Bet you if you launched a Joker series today, it might be a little bit more popular. There's Lobo by Bisley. Marvel Comics presents Ghost Rider cover by Sam Keith. And again, you know, this is all we had, so I would pour over these and stare at these small images of at least those drawn by my favorite artists. Call back to a comic from before my collecting days in my youth, which I thought was very weird. Did I do a review of that one? I may have. Not 100% sure. Some Mike Mignola. This is rare too. This is Joe Quesada on Ghost Rider cover here. And these are just images you wouldn't see any other time, right? You before the internet, you couldn't seek these out. All right, let's get through this. I didn't know the price guide was so lengthy. Dear Lord, does it ever end? All right, another cool Joe Quesada cover on X Factor there. And I think that pretty much spells it out. They would always kind of tell you about the conventions that I was always very jealous of because I lived in Canada. So for the longest time, there'd be nothing from Canada. I don't think they have anything, no kind of Canadian section here. Eventually, there would be notice of some Canadian conventions in Wizard. And still, those were probably mostly too far away for me to ever be able to get to them. That's just life as a comic book collector in Canada, at least back then. So you had a letter section, which eventually moved to the beginning of the issue. You had some letter art here, nothing too stellar that I need to write home about here. And yeah, some stuff that I kind of expected to be near the end, which actually I guess came in later issues. So there you go. You got an ad for signed comics. You got an ad for Archer and Armstrong, which never seemed interesting, even though it was drawn by Barry Windsor Smith. Sorry. So there you go. That's my anticlimactic review, I guess, of Wizard number 16. So, you know, with hindsight, obviously, there's just a very small section of this comic that, you know, was ground into my mind and burned into my psyche. And I remember, so I still have a lot of nostalgic feelings about this issue. Still love that cover. Think it's awesome. I think you guys should get just one last look at it of this, you know, kind of moment in time, the epitome of the 90s and this jam piece amongst 4 stellar Image comic book artists. Just a kind of fun time for me, the early beginnings of my comic collecting and where everything was super exciting and super fun. Yeah, just a good memory and a good issue overall, I think, for fandom back then. And for old man Max reading it today. So there you go, guys. That's my review of Wizard issue number 16. Any thoughts, comments, concerns, let me know in the comments below. If you are subscribed and you are still watching the videos, I really appreciate it. Thank you for your loyalty. Thank you so much. If you are watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a second for you. It really helps the channel out. It helps get us out there to other like-minded people who are into comics, and it really helps us grow. So everyone out there, thanks for watching and have an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.